over to Dilip.
Good evening. How's everybody doing? A stressful day, I guess. How to live on small change. On a day when big notes vanish overnight. And I think it's apt that we are doing this panel discussion on innovation in healthcare, where stress is a norm of every day in today's world, and some days make it even more stressful. And today has been that. The election day in US, which threw a lot of challenges, and of course, Modi gave a pleasant surprise, but also a challenging day for us, right? Great. Before I start, in fact, I wanted to put some ground rules. We have a great number of people waiting to really listen to some wonderful discussion with very knowledgeable panel over here. And we wanted to set some ground rules in terms of how we work on the questions. And my good friend, Dr. Jagdish, is going to tell us what the ground rules will be. Dr. Jagdish?
I don't want to list out any rules. I can just share a small incident and see if you can get the message. About a couple of months back, I was giving a talk at a conference in a medical college. And when I was like 10 minutes into the talk, I was being very courteous to the audience. And I asked, do you have any questions, so that I could make a very interactive discussion. And one elderly gentleman got up and said, yes, I have a question. And he started with when I was 5 years old. And he went on for about 10-15 minutes talking about the whole thing that I was talking about. And I was trying to figure out where the question really was in that. And then at the end, he seemed to pause. And he said, do you mind? I actually have a couple of slides about what I'm talking. Can I just put it on your laptop and show you? So I was like, okay, sure. At least you'll finish what you're trying to say. So he takes his flash drive and he puts it in my computer, shows it, and says, see, this is what I'm talking about. It's very similar to what you were saying. And he goes on for about 5 more minutes by the time I sneak down and sit into the audience. And 10 minutes later, he asked, does anyone have any questions? And I get up and say, can I finish my talk? So, yeah, with that incident, I think let's get started. Thank you.
Okay. I hope everyone got the hint on that. We will be having last 15 minutes for questions. We'll use it for effectively getting everyone to answer. I wanted to, start this discussion with a little bit of a background on where the healthcare industry in India is moving. If you look at what has been happening in past 15, 20 years, I think probably we have made a great progress in healthcare industry. From being a country where healthcare was not that affordable, to a point where it is, at least to an extent, in the cities, we are able to get a lot of medical attention. Technology-wise, we have made progress. Feasibility-wise, availability-wise, we have made great progress. Whereas while all this has happened, we still have a lot of rural areas and second-tier cities still not having the reach of healthcare. We still have that big challenge. Over all these years, India has become a kind of healthcare capital for tourism. People come over here and get a lot of healthcare, affordable healthcare from our cities. While it is affordable for many people from other countries, it still has not been affordable for a lot of Indians. So that really drives need for a lot of innovation. I mean, do we have enough innovation happening in India? Probably yes. I mean, there's a lot of innovation happening. And India is also considered as one country where the first surgeon was considered to have performed surgeon, Sushruta, right? We are not behind in terms of our ability to innovate. But the challenge has been, how do we make this innovation reach the common man? So today we are going to talk about how the progression has been made, and has there been any challenges? I mean, have we seen enough momentum in our innovation across India in healthcare sector, and have we seen this reaching the masses? So I would like to start this discussion with Dr. Jagdish. In fact, Dr. Jagdish, many of you may not be knowing, that while he is a doctor, he has been engaged and involved in inventing 18 healthcare new products. I mean, that is in 6 years. So that is like 3 products every year. That's an amazing achievement. Even engineers struggle to do it. And the doctor doing it with the help of few engineers is an amazing achievement. So I'd like to start with him on this question about, have we made enough momentum in terms of driving innovation across to make it reach common man?
Well, yeah, I think it's a very relevant question, and I think there is a lot of momentum happening, and it's only going to grow. I think we're at a very great point for the Indian medtech and healthcare innovations. A few indicators of that is a tremendous government support. I mean, I must really say that if today anybody wants to invent getting first 50 lakhs by applying to any DBT or BIRAC grant is not really a very difficult thing to do. And I've seen a lot of individual doctors and teams of engineers, designers being able to avail that money. And there are grants for medical electronic products, there are grants for very niche products. And I think the government support has been immense. And also, I think the culture amongst clinicians is changing. Being a clinician, I can tell you now that I get to speak with a lot more doctors now, talking more about how can they contribute to invent. And also seeing a great startup culture turning around in Bangalore. So I think overall the momentum is great from both the public side, both from the clinicians and the engineering community. And with a lot of incubators coming up. I know 6 or 7 years ago, having an incubator in an institute wasn't a very popular thing. There were only a handful of them in the country, but now you can see there's so many incubators in institutes, and everyone's talking about startups. So I think the momentum is great, and it's going to grow, and it's a great time to be in medtech.
Fantastic. I think I want to bring the question to Dr. Shyam. I think Shyam has been instrumental in bringing Trinetra, one of the instrument for checking the eye, and it has reached 25 countries and over 1,200 installations across 25 countries, and making it affordable. His motto is, if an invention cannot reach common man, it's not an invention that is worth mentioning. I think that's a great way to look at it, how to make a sustainable, affordable healthcare possible. So, Shyam, what are your thoughts on the momentum, and how do you see this really getting kind of, let me put it in a different way. How do you see, in terms of reaching the common man, what kind of challenges you faced, and how do you make this easier, having learned it in one way?
Yeah, thank you for the nice introduction. Yeah, what I see is that today we are in a world where all the healthcare, whatever we call today, it's all more of a sick care. We are at the hospital only when we have a problem, and most of the time, the problem cannot be actually solved. In the sense, somebody, when they reach a hospital with an eye problem, maybe they have a diabetic retina or something, and then hardly 10-15% of the sight could be recovered or restored. So what we see is that if this healthcare has to be made really affordable, we need to maybe go by what our ancestors were saying: prevention is better than cure. And if you look at that, there is a lot of things which are needed for prevention, and that is where we see that there is a need for a lot of innovation. And that is the area where we started to work. And I have been working in this area of non-communicable diseases like diabetes, hypertension, COPD, and this is a big burden. And here, if we can detect these problems at an early stage, it's not only affordable, it's also it's going to make a big difference, because it saves a lot of productivity and a lot of fun. So having said that, we started with ophthalmology, and then we looked at the problem of diabetes, and then we also looked at problems of blindness. India has the largest number of blind, actually, in the world. We have more than 16 million blind people in India. And if the world's number of blindness is around 50 million, say 1/3 is in India. And there we see that there is a need for simple equipment, IoT enabled probably, and easy to use. And these are the things which are challenges in front of us. The other important aspect what we see is, which actually now we can solve through IoT, is the accessibility. Accessibility plays a very important role. We are always understaffed. The resources are very scarce. Like for example, in ophthalmology, we have around 18,000 ophthalmologists for a population of 1.26 billion, because everyone, at some point in time need an ophthalmologist support, okay, or a dentist, or all these specialization. We have very, very small number of people, and these experts, if they have to reach out to the people, it's only IoT is the only solution for that. Like for example, nephrology we saw. There are people, more than 55 million people who are having chronic kidney disease. If they are left like that, they will reach end stage. And then more than 1.5, 2 million people will need dialysis. And the number of nephrologists in this country, is around 970. So there is an acute shortage of these resources. Not only the technicians or the doctors, also we see in equipment. And we need to see how we can innovate for that, and that's the space where we are trying to see a large opportunity.
Great. I think you brought some great points on innovations as well as how to make it affordable. I think some of the people who play a great role in making these innovations as well as affordable solutions are, of course, engineers. And Professor Ravi has been so heavily engaged in training people in the biodesign field in IIT Mumbai. In last 25 years, I think he has made a lot of contribution to that. And Anjana is going to be the one who has been funding a lot of things on the healthcare. The combination is a deadly one. One where the innovative ideas get created, and one who is willing to fund it. And I would like to really ask both of you, in terms of, if I read a lot about the Stanford biodesign labs in US, how they have made a huge progression in terms of, coming up with some of the most innovative solutions. How can we create that kind of ecosystem in India with venture capitalists and with academic team and industry? What can we do different to make this a lot more, what you call as fertile ground for creating great ideas? How can we create a new Facebook-like sensational, healthcare outcome?
Okay. Actually, Jagdish is one of them who has gone through the Stanford India Biodesign program. And I think that program, I don't have direct experience, except I did go to Stanford and ask them how they do that. They have been running for about 8, 9, 10 years, and each year they sponsor one group from India, 4 people. And in a sense, they have put a stamp on to how to do that. What we have done in IIT, I'm not in 25 years in biomedical. I'm more like I'm a mechanical engineer. And I have done innovations in manufacturing and software domains. Biomedical, I am more recent. I'm only about 10 years old. But even more specific in terms of running a biomedical innovation program, I'm only 2-year-old. Okay? So let's keep expectations very low. But in these 2 years, what we have done is we have trained about almost about 150 odd Indians in the innovation process. And they have come up with about 100, 120 plus different types of medical devices, out of which 23 have been patented last year. 1 year we filed 23 patents, including 3 or 4 PCTs, which is international patents. And out of that, we have transferred 4 to industry, including 2 startups in IIT Bombay, 2 Indian companies, and 3 hospitals have taken a few devices already into their clinical practice. So about 6, 7, give or take, in last 1, 2 years. So I think we have hit some sweet formula which seems to be working in India. And I want to answer the question in a sense, I feel that we are on a window of golden threshold, I would say. which is beautiful in the sense because the medical device innovation is seeing a huge change in multiple ways. One is people are saying for countries like India, we should focus more on diagnostics and screening. If we can screen people little advance, we can save a lot of cost burden later on, number one. And diagnostic screening, this whole sensors and IT and imaging and everything are very, very nice, I would say Brahmastras, okay? So here is a huge opportunity for youngsters to get into medical device innovation using IT, IoT, sensors, everything else. And the critical formulas there is that I tell my youngsters, don't be in a hurry to make a visiting card, put a saying MD of so-and-so company and then start developing, okay? And then hope some VC will come. Sorry, I think you can answer my question and we can fight on it. But, and then they think that some big company will come and offer them a big pot of gold to buy off the company. That's not the way in healthcare. I tell youngsters, pick a good problem to solve, which no one has solved. Jagdish also mentioned some time back that there are about 100 companies doing ECG, mobile monitoring, whatever device. 100, why should, there are 13,000 diseases and if you look at complications, must be a multiplier of that. There are millions of problems to solve. Pick a good problem to solve, okay? And go after it, and then money will chase you. That's what I tell people. The other last point I want to share here is that many of the devices need to have some core technology at the heart of it. Some biosensor, some nanosensor, something like that, which can happen only in good research institutions like IITs and IIScs and government R&D labs. These scientists, they just stop at, and I'm a scientist too, so I'm talking about myself in a sense. They just write a paper or publish a paper, patent, and then say their job is over. Okay? That's not the way it happens. I am telling these scientists to go out of their classrooms and offices and labs, go see the real world, go to hospitals, talk to patients, talk to doctors, find some good problems, and then build a team. So every team must have a doctor, an engineer, and in the current context, electronics software engineer, and an entrepreneur, someone who knows business. These 4 pillars are absolutely critical for medical device innovation, but I'm seeing a lot of these things happening here. So I have a lot of hope. I think hundreds, if not thousands of medical startups can happen in India over the next 5-year horizon. And there's a lot of, and power to them. And government is very supportive. The moment it's a healthcare, unlike IT and manufacturing, manufacturing okay, but healthcare especially, you get a lot of support from the government too. And you can leverage that. So that's what I'll share in the beginning, but I'll come back and add more points later.
Great. Thanks, Ravi. Anjana, in terms of funding it, the ideas that come from various people, today itself, I was looking at the number. It showed 10% of the startups is healthcare. On the overall India, over 450 startups, of that 45 startups are healthcare. That's an amazing number, and it's a great number. Now, how do you fund these things? What makes you that this is going to be a great innovation, I want to fund it? What are your thought processes?
So that's a very interesting observation, right? We have, over a period of time, seen more and more companies coming up within healthcare. And this has actually been a reason that this has increasingly been an area of focus for us and many of the other VCs in the ecosystem. It's a function of the development ecosystem improving. It's a function of government being more supportive of early projects. It's a function of academia taking more initiative. And that's the point at which that a VC can come in, right? Typically, when a venture capital fund looks to invest in a startup, especially in healthcare and life sciences, the metrics, if you will, are slightly different from what they would be in a traditional IoT setup or a traditional technology business. Now, there are a few obvious things that are important to cover, right? So there is market potential of your product. Is it a real problem that you're solving? One of the things that we often find is that you either have a very strong research-oriented team or you have a very strong technology-oriented team. There are actually 3 pillars that are important to make a business succeed. You need to understand the clinical side or the technical side very well, you need to solve the engineering problem very well, and you need to have a very clear lens on go-to-market. It's very important that when you think about product potential, you factor all these 3 things in. So that's a little bit about product market potential. The second is true innovation on the product. Now, historically, if I were to take a snapshot of, say, 10 years back, we still had companies that were developing slightly lower cost products for India, but they were not cutting edge. In the last 5 years, that has actually changed. The quality of development in medtech and even in healthcare technology products which don't necessarily require hardware. And some of this has just been enabled by the fact that everyone has a very strong processor in their hand and data connectivity has improved. Because of that, the quality of development in India, for India and the world, has actually improved. This has not happened before. And therefore, when you approach a venture capital fund, it's important that you have a very clear lens on how innovative your product is. Is it truly path-breaking? Or is it something that is affordable and is made for India? Now, depending on this, the go-to-market approach would be very different, right? Go-to-market, by the way, is one area where we find a lot of companies struggle. Now, India is a very fragmented healthcare market. Most affordable products are actually low-ticket items, right? So while a GE, for example, can have a proper sales team to build the reach to rural markets, if you're selling a product that's worth a few hundred rupees or 1,000 rupees even, you cannot ever justify the cost of a sales team. So then what innovative mechanism have you come up with to approach the go-to-market problem for India? If it's a global market problem, then you need to have that perspective. Who on your team or who as an advisor will give you that view? That's important, and that's something that a VC will look for, saying, do you have that prior experience? Is there someone working with you? Have you hired someone? I think these are some of the things that people will look at. What stage is equally important? When you look at a traditional technology startup, the point at which you have a prototype and the point at which you can go to market are probably a few months away. When this becomes healthcare, the onus of proof on you is substantially higher. So it's not a few months, it's probably a year, it's probably 3 years. So a traditional VC will look for some proof of concept of the product working in the market. Now, you may not need a lot of revenue for that, but you will need someone to vouch for it, right? If you are eventually going to sell to an ophthalmologist, you would at least hope to have a few ophthalmologists say, hey, I've tried this product, I will pay so much money for it. Or if you want to sell it in the US, you want to make sure that you have some market testing that you have done, because there, of course, FDA will cost a lot of money and all of that, but you have market feedback. And at that point, if you come to a VC and say, hey, I need to raise so many $1 million because this is what I believe the market potential is, this is how special my product is, and this is my plan for go-to-market, then that becomes a very credible pitch.
Okay, great point. I think this brings to understand the challenges that we face versus rest of the world. Venu has been in a position to really understand this from what he does sitting in Boston, as to how the development on the healthcare sector happens there, the kind of coordination that happens with clinicians, doctors, and academia, and the way the cycle of development gets there. Venu, do you see a big difference in the way this happens in Western world versus in India, or do we have a challenge?
They are different, and there are some places where we do very well, and there are some places where we could do better. I want to pick on, and I will try and elaborate that with a certain context, right? I was an entrepreneur for about 8 years, and I was trying to build a product that, but at that time I thought was quite innovative, and I still think it is innovative. And it was for a worldwide market, and it exceeded reasonably well, and after which I took off to Boston. But the biggest lesson I learned out of that was, before we started this, the founders and I spent close to 1.5 years doing nothing, no salary, nothing, but working with a hospital, literally following a doctor, right? And being in an ICU, and literally doing nothing. And to tell you the truth, it was such a, if there is any description of drinking from a fire hydrant, that's probably what it was. It came to the point where, at the end of the day, I would have discussions with my mentor and I would have to videotape the conversation because half of what he says I can't even understand. So I have to go back and Google things and figure it out. That 1.5 years was probably the most useful thing that actually happened. Because the number of problems that can be unearthed in that process is immense, and it is much more valuable than any education you can get from books or any of that sort. And the reason I stress this is because when you are trying to do a startup that has got a long period before it hits its promised land, it is extremely crucial to be able to describe and define the problem very correctly, because you don't know when you're on the wrong path, right? The 100 different ECG companies may be doing ECGs all the time, but if they are really not solving, let's say, an atrial fibrillation problem or a congestive heart failure problem, it is the problem that you are after. It is not the technology that you are after. You do not want to be in a situation where you have a hammer and you're looking for a nail. I worry about that a lot in our milieu, because the medtech field gets flooded by engineers who think that if I see sun rising in a day and the rooster crows, then I believe that if the rooster crows, the sun would shine. That is not the case. Unfortunately, medicine is an incredible field, several hundred years, and a lot of the simple things that we engineers sit around a table think that can be done have been tried and not worked. So that knowledge transfer to a med device field is extremely tough, and that comes to that difference. One of the big advantages that we have in India is that I could do what I did with a doctor. You cannot dream of doing that in the United States. There will be 100 different lawyers after you and making sure that your nail beds are checked for infection before they even come let you near a patient. It's not to say that we are lax about it, but we have a practical approach to it, right? And I think that is very useful. It has to be exploited. The place where we run into trouble is that the doctors, with all due respect, are like a millimeter away from God, and so it's very difficult to get time from them, right? So, and that problem, I have noticed, is actually a little harder in India, right? Yeah, but my experience was doctors in India are incredibly busy. I remember asking a question on telehealth, right? I was working with a hospital, and they had a very good telehealth plan, an offsite where fantastic equipment, a nurse there who can take all the measurements, etc., and stuff comes in, and you would think it would work, and it is completely empty. And not only was it empty, even the people from that town, it was Goa, and they would come to this hospital a long distance to get treated rather than go to the place. And when I talk to the doctors, what they say is that, look, I really don't have time to get another 5 more ECGs. I really don't. That is a real problem, right? And doctors here, at least compared to the doctors I've seen in the United States, after they become assistant professor or something, they have a life. Doctors here are very, very busy. So that's one issue. The second issue that I find, and here I really blame the big hospital chains, and that is, at least in the West, there is a very clear understanding that development of a medical ecosystem, especially medtech, helps the doctors and the hospitals, and hence they foster this. There are places where you can go and get these connections made. I mean, if you go to Houston, Houston has an incredibly big hospital network. Baylor Hospital is called Texas Medical Center. Texas Medical Center is a big, huge institution with a warehouse bigger than all of these rooms put together, where they pull in people, all the startups in that area, and at least once a quarter, these startups, these medical device startups, are made to pitch them to a panel of expert doctors of the world, right? Those are incredibly valuable stuff, which is something that we could do better. So those are the things that I feel that we could do better and we are better at. I want to make one more last point, and that is, again, in the entrepreneurship journey, especially in healthcare, it has a lot of ups and downs, right? You don't become cash positive in 6 months. That's not possible, right? One of the advantages of the healthcare field, which I have noticed very strangely, is that it is very easy to motivate people to work in what we do, because at the end of the day, we make a real difference. And I look at Shyam, and there is a sense of respect, adulation, and jealousy on what he can able to do, right? And it all comes together, and that is an important piece of an entrepreneurship journey, because you're only as good as the team you can get. And in fact, I would go back and say, you're only as good as how good your team is when you're in the depths of trouble. And that is where this is a huge advantage. And we are a little bit more emotional people, and this actually works. So I found, cutting edge algorithm people and people who are very motivated to do crazy things easier to find. And so many ideas that get orphaned in the West actually works out here. So those were the differences that I found.
Actually, just to build off that, right, while there is more support from an ecosystem standpoint in, say, the East Coast in the US, I think developing healthcare, cutting-edge R&D in healthcare in India is actually possibly easier if you have a good team in India. And this is because the level of medico-legal challenges you may have to face are almost non-existent compared to a market like the US, and therefore what would cost several $1 million there would probably cost a few $100,000 here. You get access to patient data quite easily, probably too easily. But the fact is, if you're developing something, you need to test it against real data. You get it very easily in India. All you need to do is partner with 1 or 2 good hospitals. The third thing is that even your access to patients, once you need to start doing some sort of trials, is again very easy. Even the regulatory environment in India is much more relaxed than it is in most other higher paying regulated markets. So what that means is, even if you have a cutting edge product that you're coming out with in India, it will take much less money, possibly much less time, if you have the right team. Because you can test the product in India while you're jumping through the regulatory hoops in other markets. And that's actually something that at least we've started seeing some companies do. And it's a little bit of an advantage that you have because you're here. So although you don't have some of the benefits of being in a very vibrant ecosystem, it's important to tap into that at the right time. But India is a little bit of an opportunity waiting to happen, and it's in a way already started.